Hi, everyone, and welcome back to U.S. History. This is our last section of notes for the unit, and by extension, the first semester. So, game plan for today. We've got these notes we're going to do. There's a documentary we're going to watch, and then you do have a Jamboard assignment to wrap up the unit as your homework assignment today. So, without further ado, let's dive into the notes and get started. So, the war's impact. As successful was for the United States, following the war, a number of issues began to rise, specifically things like in the economy. Strikes became rather commonplace, the rise of the cost of living. There was racial unrest across the country, the Red Scare, political conflict, and throw an epidemic on top of it. So let's talk about those. Starting with the economy. Following the end of the war, the economy began to transition back to peacetime. A lot of issues that had gone away during the war came back. Inflation caused the prices of everyday essentials to skyrocket. People coming back from the war struggled to find jobs, and people were getting laid off as factories ran out of goods to make. We see this all the time in U.S. history when we de-escalated or left a conflict. Transitioning the economy back from wartime to peacetime typically meant that people lost their jobs. More often than not, it was African Americans and women that were losing their jobs as these coming home. Now, one of the biggest issues to arise were a series of strikes. Now, there are three main ones we're going to talk about. The first one being in Seattle, a general strike. 35,000 shipyard workers went on strike and paralyzed the city of Seattle for better working and pay conditions. In Boston, 75% of the police force walked off, and the city was nearly destroyed in a series of riots following that strike starting. They simply just wanted better pay. And then we have the steel strike. 350,000 steel workers walked off in order to get better pay, hours, and recognition of their union. And these are just the main ones. There were strikes happening all across the country. Now, in terms of racial unrest, the post-economic turmoil also contributed to widespread racial unrest, and many people began to blame African Americans for the lack of jobs that were available. In 1919 alone, 25 race riots broke out across the nation. The worst riots were in the city of Chicago, and the riots lasted for about 2 weeks. In Chicago alone, 38 people were killed and more than 500 were injured in the incidents. Following these riots, the NAACP actually experienced a massive surge in membership all across. Now, by far, one of the biggest scares was that of the Red Scare, or communism. Now, during the war, Russia had to pull out to fight a civil war. The civil war allowed a new communist government to rise, and the U.S. was specifically scared of communism. This led to a nationwide panic known as the Red Scare, and something known as the Palmer Raids. In April of 1919, the U.S. Postal Service intercepted more than 30 packages containing bombs. Each of these packages was addressed to prominent Americans across the country. One of them was addressed to Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer. Palmer, in response to this, established the General Intelligence Division of the Department of Justice. This is still existent today, but we know it as a different name. We know it as the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or the FBI. Palmer actually, after establishing that, ordered a series of raids on the Union of Russian Workers in 12 cities. 7 weeks later, 249 immigrants were deported to Russia for their connections to communism. Now, these raids continued on for months until the spring of 1920. Nearly 6,000 people were arrested in these raids and 600 were deported. Most of these people that were arrested were denied a court hearing or any type of due process, which is a basic right under the U.S. Constitution. The raiders were hailed as heroes for these acts, but they failed to find any proof of a communist revolution in the United States. In response to this, 30 states would actually pass laws making it illegal to join groups advocating for revolution. Now, those laws have all since been repealed since then, but it's important to note during the first half of the 20th century and even up until the 70s and 80s, communism was a scary thing to the people of the United States. So in 1920, Wilson was on his way out. He wasn't going to run again. And the election saw a number of issues being brought up. The Democrats were represented by James M. Cox and Franklin D. Roosevelt, and the Republicans were represented by Warren G. Harding. Wilson wanted the Democrats to make the Treaty of Versailles and the League of Nations a large part of their platform, and they did. But Harding had argued for a return to normalcy in the country, thinking we've been at war for a couple years now. We need to get back to normal. This won him the election. And to put racial, labor, and economic troubles behind them going forward. All right. So I do believe that is. Oh, no, we've got one more slide. Here we go. On the Spanish flu. While all of these other issues were going on, the U.S. had to deal with another issue, a pandemic. The Spanish flu began to spread as early as 1918 in the United States and in Europe. This massively slowed the war effort at home due to so many people falling ill and was a massive issue in peacetime as well. By the end of the pandemic, 675,000 Americans had died from it. The Spanish flu is actually considered to be one of the deadliest forms of flu to have ever existed. All right, that is it for notes for today. So what you're going to do now is we're going to watch that documentary, and then you'll have that assignment as your homework tonight. I'll see you all next time. Bye, everyone.